Did you know that in a country once hailed as the Rainbow Nation, the streets are now filled with more people than ever before, struggling to survive without a roof over their heads? Welcome to South Africa.
High levels of poverty and unemployment have seen a drastic increase in the number of people living on the streets.
The population of the homeless at Trinity is very diverse. I think some of the myths that we looked at was crime, drugs, things like that.
It's very tough, because sometimes you don't know where to eat.
Move. I'm not gonna move. Where must we go to?
Where the homeless population is exploding at an alarming rate, painting a picture far darker than most of us could ever imagine. Imagine sleeping on cold concrete tonight. No blanket, no safety, no hope. What if I told you that right now, over 55,000 people in South Africa have no place to call home? And this number isn't just rising, it's exploding. Why is one of Africa's richest nations failing its most vulnerable? Stick around, because what you're about to learn will shock you. First, let's set the scene. South Africa, a country known for its stunning landscapes, rich culture, and complex history, is now facing a crisis that's tearing at the very fabric of its society. The homeless population is not just increasing, it's exploding. But why? What are the factors driving this heartbreaking surge?
I was just very depressed. I just isolated myself from the world. And I think the real knock came when my dad died. And then it was like I had nothing then. I had my mother was still alive, but when my dad died, it was just so heavy.
It's just after midday.
This isn't a scene from a war zone. This is Cape Town. This is Johannesburg. This is South Africa in 2025. And if you think you know the whole story, think again. Recent studies and news reports reveal that the number of homeless people in South Africa has skyrocketed. In cities like Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban, thousands of people are living on the streets. But why is this happening? What's driving this crisis? Let's start with a number: 55,719. That's how many people the government says are homeless today. But here's the truth. This number has quadrupled since 1996. 55,719 lives shattered. 55,719 stories of survival. And 7 out of 10 are sleeping on streets, under bridges, or in abandoned buildings. No walls, no doors, no protection from the violence lurking in the shadows. Let's break it down. There are several key factors contributing to this alarming rise in homelessness. First, we have the economic situation. South Africa's economy has been struggling for years. Unemployment rates are soaring, and many people simply can't afford housing. In fact, according to recent statistics, the unemployment rate is over 30%, leaving millions of people without a steady income. Here's a question for you. How would you cope if you lost your job and couldn't find another one for months, maybe even years? It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? Now imagine that's your reality. For many South Africans, this is their daily struggle.
I've lost my job.
Me and my husband lost our jobs.
Because of this COVID, I
Next,
lost
we
my
have
job.
the issue of housing.
Our jobs.
The demand for affordable housing far outstrips the supply. Many people who once had homes have been evicted due to rising rents and property prices. And for those living in informal settlements, the threat of eviction is always looming. The government has promised to build more houses, but progress is slow and the need is urgent. Here's another question for you. What would you do if you were forced to leave your home with nowhere else to go? For many, the streets become their only option. But life on the streets is far from easy. It's dangerous, unpredictable, and often violent. Economic factors. The struggle for survival. Let's start by talking about the economic situation in South Africa, which is a major reason why so many people are finding themselves without a home. Imagine trying to make ends meet when there are simply no jobs available. This is the reality for millions of South Africans today. High unemployment rates, the jobless struggle. South Africa has been dealing with high unemployment rates for a very long time.
South Africa's job crisis has reached boiling point. Around it, protesters are demanding urgent government action to protect employment and revive collapsed industries, while many accuse authorities of failing workers.
This means that a large number of people who want to work simply cannot find a job. The situation has become even worse in recent years due to economic downturns and the COVID-19 pandemic. When businesses struggle or close down, they lay off workers and new jobs become scarce. Think about it this way. If you were looking for a job and couldn't find one for months or even years, how would you pay your bills? How would you put food on the table or keep a roof over your head? For many South Africans, this is not just a hypothetical situation. It's their daily life. With no steady income, paying for basic necessities like food, healthcare, and housing becomes impossible. As a result, many people are forced to leave their homes and live on the streets because they simply cannot afford to pay rent or keep up with mortgage payments. The unemployment crisis is particularly harsh on young people. Many graduates enter the job market with high hopes, only to find that there are no jobs available. This creates a cycle of poverty that is difficult to break, as without a job, they cannot earn money, and without money, they cannot improve their situation. Poverty, the vicious cycle. Now let's talk about poverty, which is another critical factor contributing to homelessness. A significant portion of South Africa's population lives below the poverty line. This means that they do not have enough money to meet their basic needs. When people are living in poverty, they're constantly struggling to survive. They have to make difficult choices every day, such as whether to buy food or pay for rent. Poverty and homelessness are closely linked. When people don't have enough money, they can't afford to pay for housing. Even if they manage to find a place to live, they may not be able to keep up with the payments. This is especially true for those who are living on very low incomes or who rely on government assistance programs, which often do not provide enough support to cover the cost of housing. The lack of financial resources also means that people living in poverty are less able to cope with unexpected expenses or emergencies. For example, if someone gets sick or has an accident, they may not be able to afford medical treatment. This can lead to further financial strain and make it even harder to keep a roof over their heads. Moreover, poverty affects more than just individuals. It impacts families and communities as well. When parents cannot afford to provide for their children, it affects their children's education, health, and future prospects. This creates a vicious cycle, as children growing up in poverty are more likely to face homelessness and unemployment themselves. In summary, the combination of high unemployment rates and widespread poverty creates a perfect storm for homelessness. Without a steady income or financial resources, many people are unable to secure and maintain stable housing. This leaves them vulnerable to eviction and forces them into a life on the streets, where they face even greater challenges and uncertainties. The housing crisis, a struggle for shelter. Let's dive into another major reason why so many people in South Africa are becoming homeless: the housing crisis. Imagine living in a country where there aren't enough homes for everyone who needs one. This is the reality for many South Africans today. Shortage of affordable housing. Not enough homes to go around. One of the biggest problems is that there simply aren't enough affordable homes available. The demand for housing is much higher than the supply, which means that there are more people looking for homes than there are homes to go around. This is especially true for people who are struggling financially. Think about it like this. If there are 1,000 people looking for a place to live, but only 500 homes available, then 500 people will be left without a home. This is the situation in many parts of South Africa. The shortage of affordable housing is so severe that it affects people from all walks of life, including those who have jobs but still can't afford to buy or rent a home. The cost of building new homes is also a big issue. Construction materials and labor are expensive, and many developers focus on building homes that will make them the most profit. This often means building expensive houses and apartments that only the wealthy can afford, rather than affordable homes for ordinary people. Rising rent costs, priced out of the market. Even if people can find a place to rent, the cost of renting has been going up and up. In many cities, rents have increased so much that they are now out of reach for ordinary people. For example, someone who is working a low-paying job might find that most of their salary goes towards paying rent, leaving them with very little money for other necessities like food, clothing, and transportation. Imagine trying to live on a tight budget and then having your rent increased by hundreds of rands every month. For many people, this is not just a possibility, it's a reality. When rents rise faster than people's incomes, it becomes impossible for them to keep up. As a result, they may be forced to move to less desirable areas, live in overcrowded conditions, or, in the worst cases, end up on the streets.
I was living in Thokoza, and then where I was living was paying rent. Then my work had finished, so I didn't have anywhere to go. So I'd rather go stay in the street.
Evictions, losing the roof over your head. Another major problem is evictions. This happens when people are unable to pay their rent or mortgage and are forced to leave their homes. Evictions can be legal, meaning they are ordered by a court, or illegal, meaning they are carried out without proper legal procedures.
Don't touch me! Hey, don't touch me!
For many people, the threat of eviction is a constant source of stress. They live in fear of losing their homes because they know that if they are evicted, they may have nowhere else to go. This is especially true for those who live in informal settlements or who are renting from landlords who do not follow the law. Evictions can have devastating consequences. Not only do people lose their homes, but they also often lose their possessions and their sense of security. Children may have to change schools, and families may be separated. For those who end up on the streets, the situation is even more dire, as they face the dangers of living without shelter.
I'm not gonna move. I'm not gonna move. Where must we go?
The impact on communities. The housing crisis doesn't just affect individuals and families. It also has a big impact on communities. When people are forced to leave their homes, it can lead to the breakdown of communities and social structures. People who are homeless often have to move frequently, which makes it hard for them to form lasting relationships or participate in community activities. Historical and political factors, the long shadow of the past. Let's talk about how the past and politics in South Africa have played a big role in the current homelessness crisis. It's important to understand that the problems we see today didn't just appear out of nowhere. They have deep roots in the country's history. The legacy of apartheid, a divided society. First, let's go back to the time of apartheid, which was a system of racial segregation and discrimination that lasted for decades in South Africa.
So in many respects, what happened to colored people is they identified with the Europeans and disassociated themselves from things African.
Under apartheid, people were treated differently based on the color of their skin. Black South Africans were denied many basic rights, including the right to live where they wanted and to have access to good jobs and education. This system created huge inequalities in society. Black people were often forced to live in poor, overcrowded areas called townships, while white people had access to better housing, schools, and jobs. Even though apartheid officially ended in the 1990s, the effects of this system are still felt today. One of the biggest legacies of apartheid is the spatial inequality it created. Many Black South Africans still live far away from job opportunities and essential services like hospitals and schools. This makes it harder for them to find and keep jobs, which in turn makes it harder for them to afford housing. The long distances they have to travel every day also mean that they spend a lot of money on transportation, leaving them with less money for other necessities.
Ineffective government policies, promises versus reality. After apartheid ended, the new government promised to address the inequalities and provide better housing for all South Africans. They launched programs to build more homes and provide subsidies to those in need. However, these efforts have often fallen short of their goals. There are several reasons why government housing policies have not been as effective as hoped. One issue is corruption. In some cases, officials have been caught stealing money that was meant for housing projects or giving contracts to friends and family instead of to qualified builders. This means that fewer homes get built, and those that are built are often of low quality. Another problem is the slow pace of development. Building homes takes time and money, and the government has struggled to keep up with the demand. Many people who are waiting for government housing have been on waiting lists for years, with no end in sight. This leaves them in a state of uncertainty and makes it harder for them to plan for the future. Political challenges, a lack of unity and vision. The political landscape in South Africa also plays a role in the homelessness crisis. The country has a democratic government, but it is not always united in its approach to solving problems. Different political parties and leaders often have different ideas about how to address issues like housing and poverty. This lack of unity can lead to delays in implementing effective policies. For example, there may be debates and disagreements about how to spend government money or about which areas should receive the most attention. As a result, important projects and initiatives may be put on hold or not receive the funding they need. Moreover, political instability can make it harder for businesses to invest in the country, which in turn affects job creation and economic growth. When businesses are uncertain about the future, they are less likely to hire new workers or expand their operations. This contributes to the high unemployment rate, which is a major cause of homelessness. The role of policy and governance. In addition to the challenges mentioned above, there are also issues with how policies are implemented and enforced. For example, some local governments may not have the resources or capacity to manage housing projects effectively. This can lead to delays, mismanagement, and a lack of accountability. Furthermore, there is often a disconnect between national policies and local realities. Policies that work well in one area may not be suitable for another, due to differences in demographics, geography, and economic conditions. This makes it harder to develop solutions that can be applied across the board. In summary, the historical and political factors contributing to homelessness in South Africa are complex and interconnected. The legacy of apartheid, ineffective government policies, and political challenges all play a role in the current crisis. Addressing these issues will require a concerted effort from all levels of government, as well as cooperation and collaboration with civil society and the private sector. Only by working together can we hope to find lasting solutions to this pressing problem. Social and health issues. The human face of homelessness. Escaping abuse. Another reason why people become homeless is domestic violence. Many women and children end up on the streets because they are fleeing abusive situations at home. Imagine living in fear every day, not knowing if you or your children will be safe. For some, leaving home is the only way to escape violence and find safety. However, leaving an abusive situation is not the end of the struggle. Many women and children who flee domestic violence have nowhere to go. They may end up in shelters or on the streets where they face new challenges and dangers. Without a support network or access to resources, it can be very difficult for them to rebuild their lives. Lack of support systems. Alone and vulnerable. Homeless people often lack the support systems that most of us take for granted. They may not have family or friends who can help them in times of need. This leaves them isolated and vulnerable, with no one to turn to when things get tough. Think about how important it is to have a support network. When we face challenges, we rely on our loved ones for emotional support, advice, and practical help. For homeless people, this safety net is often missing. They have to navigate the difficulties of homelessness on their own, which can make it even harder to find a way out. Health problems, a constant battle. Homelessness also takes a toll on physical health. People living on the streets often have limited access to healthcare, which means that minor health problems can quickly become serious. They may not have access to nutritious food, clean water, or safe shelter, all of which are essential for good health. Imagine trying to recover from an illness or injury while living on the streets. It's a difficult and often impossible task. Homeless people are more likely to suffer from chronic health conditions such as diabetes, heart disease, and respiratory problems. They are also at higher risk of contracting infectious diseases due to crowded living conditions and poor hygiene. The cycle of homelessness, hard to break. All of these challenges, mental health issues, addiction, lack of support, and health problems make it very difficult for people to escape homelessness. It's a cycle that can be hard to break. Without access to the resources and support they need, many people find themselves trapped in a life on the streets. For example, someone who is struggling with mental health issues and addiction may find it hard to hold down a job or maintain stable housing. Without a job, they can't afford housing, and without housing, they may not have the stability they need to address their mental health and addiction problems. It's a vicious cycle that can seem impossible to overcome. In summary, the social and health issues associated with homelessness are complex and interconnected. They affect every aspect of a person's life and make it difficult for them to find a way out of their situation. Addressing these issues requires a compassionate and holistic approach that takes into account the many challenges that homeless people face. In conclusion, the homeless population explosion in South Africa is a crisis that demands our attention. It's a complex issue with deep roots, and solving it will require a multifaceted approach. But by coming together as a community, we can make a difference. Let's not turn a blind eye to this crisis. Instead, let's work towards a future where everyone has a place to call home.